Thank you so much, Lester. I'm going to read from Luke's Gospel and then share a few things from it. So let's look at Luke chapter 15 and starting at verse 11. And it will appear on the screens as well. And Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and I will go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. And meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has it back safe and sound.' The elder brother became angry and refused to go with him. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" Today I want to talk oh my goodness, I dropped the Bible. That's not how you want to start your first sermon at a new church, dropping the word of God on the floor. Please forgive me, just wipe that from your memory. We'll start again. Today I want to talk about coming home. Not going home, about coming home. And because each of us within our hearts have a longing for home. Actually, one of my favourite things is coming home. So on holiday, my favourite moment of the holiday is coming back to my home. The key in the door, being back in my home, safe and sound. Because home is where you belong. It's where you feel safe. It's where you're loved. It's where you have a role. I love coming home. But one of the strange things was 2 years ago, we were happily living in Brighton, and we'd been living there for 11 years at that stage. But we came back after a time away. We'd been living in Hong Kong for 3 months on sabbatical. We came back, And suddenly I didn't feel at home in Brighton. And there was a stirring that God was doing within me and within Tara, that there was actually going to be a new home for us. And it took a while, it's taken 2 years, but finally we are here. And it feels like we've come home. And that's to do with the welcome that you have given us, but also there's something about the city. I don't know whether it's something about the arms of Christie above the city, but it looks like the arms of an embrace welcoming us home. And so we all long to be home. We all crave a home. And we need a physical home. Everyone needs a physical home. And one of the great tragedies of the world is how many people are without a physical home. We saw it in Brighton, we see it in Rio, we see it all around the world. But as well as a physical home, we need a spiritual home. The Old Testament describes God often as our dwelling place, our refuge, our fortress. In the New Testament, Jesus says, "Come to me, make your home in me." St. Augustine, probably the greatest theologian of all time, starts his confessions with the words, with the prayer to God, "You made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until we find rest in you." Our true home is found not in a location, but in a person, in the God who loves you and me. And yet it is easy to become restless, to miss out on this spiritual home that is on offer to each one of us. I don't know whether anyone remembers, or whether it made it to Brazil, the quality TV program that was Quantum Leap in the 1990s. Is that familiar to anyone? Maybe just a few people. Okay, there was a program called Quantum Leap that always started with the same monologue, an introduction that explained what was going on in the program. And it went like this. This was in the early 90s. Theorising that one could travel within his own lifetime, Dr. Sam Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap Accelerator and vanished. That's amazing. He woke to find himself trapped in the past, facing mirror images that were not his own, and driven by an unknown force to change history for the better. His only guide on this journey is Al, an observer from his own time, who appears in the form of a hologram that only Sam could see and hear. It really was brilliant. And so Dr. Beckett finds himself leaping from life to life, striving to put right what once went wrong, and hoping each time that the next leap will be the leap home. And it's that line about hoping that each leap would be the leap home. And actually, I remember watching the final episode in 1993, and it ended with the words, "And Sam Beckett never returned home." And I wonder how many of us find ourselves simply leaping from things, searching for hope, leaping from job to job, or from place to place, or from relationship to relationship, or from screen to screen, hoping each time that the next leap would be the leap home. Ever since the Garden of Eden, human beings have lost their spiritual hope and been searching for it. There is something within us that longs for hope. And this is a story here in Luke's Gospel of two boys who desperately need to come home. With one of them, it's very obvious that he's away from home. The younger son, he is geographically distant from his father, and he's very obviously away from home. But with the older son, he too is away from home. But for him, it is not so obvious, it's hidden. For the younger son, it's very visible. For the older son, it's invisible. But he has allowed his heart to become distant from his father, and so he needs to come home. And Carl Jung, I think, was the first to come up with the theory of introverts and extroverts. That all people are either introverts and extroverts. So extroverts are drawn to the external world of people and activities, whereas introverts are drawn to the internal world of thoughts and emotions. Extroverts engage with their environment, whereas introverts analyse their environment. Now, it might be helpful for you to know that I am an introvert. So I love all of you. I love you. I'm going to love all of you. I love you already. But I also like time by myself. I like peace and quiet. 2 weeks in a silent monastery sounds like heaven to me. So I'm more introverted, and you'll discover that over time. Whereas Tara is more extroverted. Tara loves to be around people, and so the way I feel like the best way to settle into Brazil, get to know the city, is to find a quiet space and read a book about Brazil. Whereas Tara feels like the best way to settle in is to actually meet people, go to places, find the shops, and actually engage with the city. They're equally good, I think, in my mind. Tara's not as much of an extrovert as some people. I don't know whether you met Kat and Rich Wilson, who was staying with at the moment. They're on another level, really, in terms of extroversion, which is a great job. But the point is this: I wonder whether the younger son is an extrovert and the older son is an introvert. And there are extroverted ways of getting lost, and there are introverted ways of getting lost. The younger son has got lost in very extroverted ways, through parties and activities, and the friends that he's been with have managed to get him lost. But the older son has got lost in introverted ways, through the hardening of his heart. Internally, he's managed to find himself very lost. But however you are, all of us have a need to come home. And the first step to coming home is to come to our senses. It says this: the younger son came to his senses. He saw the signs that he was not really at home and needed to come home to his father. What are the signs? Well, we see it in this passage. I mean, first of all, it says that he had nothing left. When it feels like you've tried everything, spent everything, and you've got nothing left, then it's time to come home. He was literally dying. When it feels like something's dying within you, and then it's time to come home. This boy was trying to satisfy. He wanted to eat the food that was meant for the pigs. Now, he must have known that this wouldn't really satisfy his hunger. But when you find yourself trying to satisfy yourself with things that you know deep down are not really going to satisfy you, then it's time to come home. Actually, speaking of wanting to satisfy yourself with things that don't really satisfy you, I discovered a new word yesterday, which is snacksident. Has anyone come across it? It's the blending of two words, snack and accident. And so it's used in the sense of, I saw a bowl of powdered cajun, and I meant to have only one, but I had a snacksident, and I ate all of it. So that's how to use the word snacksident, correct? Anyway, that was just trying to satisfy things which you know won't satisfy you deep down. But this boy also, he was grew up in a good Jewish family. Pigs were unclean, you wouldn't go even near them. And yet he found himself having to feed these pigs. And when you find yourself doing things that you promised yourself you would never do, then it's time to come home. And this older son, there are signs that he needs to come home too. And when this younger son arrives, he resents the fact that all the attention is on him. And when we find ourselves resenting the attention that is given to other people, then it's time to come home. It says that this younger son, he doesn't even refer to his brother as his brother. He says, this son of yours. And again, when you find yourself distancing yourself from the people around you, isolating yourself, being filled with hostility, then it's time to come home. It says that you couldn't join the party. When your heart has become so full of bitterness and anger and resentment that you cannot celebrate and share in the joy of other people, then it's time to come home. But these boys need to come home, and they do because of the Father. This story is much more about the Father than it is about the sons. And the Father is the one who is able to bring them back home. There's the younger son walks towards his father, it says that the Father saw him, was filled with compassion, and ran to him. The Father saw him. The Father sees everything that's going on in your life. He sees your pain. He sees your confusion. He sees your struggles. He sees who you truly are. He sees all these things better than you see them yourself. He sees you. He has compassion on you. The things that hurt you, hurt him. The things that are a struggle for you, he feels that. He has compassion on you. And he runs to you. He doesn't expect us to come all the way to him. He runs to us. And look at what he does. It says that he ran to his son and hugged him and kissed him. I read a story about a 7-year-old a man who talked about when he was 7 years old, he went to his father and went to give his father a hug. But his father stepped back away from him, pushed him away, and said, now that you're 7 years old, we don't hug, we only shake hands. And this man said, something in me died that day. Well, here in the story, we get the opposite. The youngest son comes to his father expecting at best a handshake. But his father instead gives him a hug, and something comes alive. He hugs him. And then he says, quick, bring up a robe as simple that his shame is covered. All the mistakes of the past, they're covered, you cannot see them anymore. All his shame, all his guilt, all of that is covered. Sandals on his feet, a symbol of sonship. He's not going to be a slave, he's going to be a son. We are given the opportunity to be sons and daughters of the Father. And then he says, he puts a ring on his finger. Now this is significant. What was it Beyonce used to sing about rings on fingers? There was something about if you like to put a ring on it or something. The grammar's a little confusing, and I'm not quite sure, and it was quite a long time ago. Anyway, there was this connection between being loved and being given a ring. And actually, in a wedding service, it's a great privilege to be able to do weddings. The priest prays over the rings, that may these rings be a symbol to you of unending love and faithfulness. And this symbol of unending love and faithfulness is given to this son. This is what's on offer to all of us. We may be married or we may be single. We may be divorced or we may be widowed. But all of us get to wear a ring. All of us have a symbol of that unending love and faithfulness from God our Father. This is the love of the Father. This is what is on offer to every single one of us. And you notice it only takes a small step. It's just the smallest step. The youngest lady just says he came to his senses and started when he was a long way off. His father ran to him. We don't have to cover that great distance. Indeed, we cannot. Only God can cover that great distance. And he is the one who covers that great distance. We just make the smallest steps. It's the beginnings of a prayer. The raising of a hand in response to a talk. Coming forward to the front at the time of communion. Just tiny little steps. And then God comes and he does all the rest. He embraces us, he heals us, he transforms us. This is a God who is full of love and celebration. But notice the way that he is able to bring us home each in our own way. Because remembering that theory of introversion and extroversion, with the younger son, an extrovert, he brings him home in very extroverted ways. Notice it's loud, it involves all the senses, it's a robe and a feast and celebrations and hugs, and it's very physical. And the extroverted son is brought home in very extroverted ways. But the younger son, the older son, the introverted older son, notice the father goes out to him and gives him space. He talks with him. He reasons with him. He says, this is what I must do, what we must do. He uses logic. He allows the older son to have the space to express his feelings, express his emotions, and to find his own way. And I would love us to be a church that expresses the heart of the Father in both those ways. That we are a church that does great celebrations, that worships God loudly and passionately and with our whole hearts, and enables people to come home in those ways. But also a church that's able to welcome people in quiet ways, with time, with patience, with long conversations, dealing with tensions. And two of the things that I was involved with at our old church at St. Peter's were, one of the things was called Safety, which is very like your street church on Saturday night. We used to open up the church for the homeless community. And when we started, back 13 years ago, we were given some advice by the people who were doing that sort of work. Say, what you want to do is set up a table outside the church, have a big kind of vat of soup and some bread rolls. You only need maybe 3 or 4 volunteers. People can come, help themselves to soup and bread, and then you can feed people like that, and that will be how you can do it. And you only need 3 or 4 volunteers. And we thought about it for a bit, and I'm not sure this quite expresses exactly what we want to do in the heart of the Father. We thought, actually, instead of that, we're actually going to invite our guests into the church, and we'll have banqueting tables and flowers on the tables, and we'll try and do not just soup and bread, but the finest meal. Actually, let's try and make it the finest meal that anyone can get at Brighton. And let's have hosts on every table, and people welcoming at the door. And then we gave instructions to the people on the door. Please welcome every single homeless man and woman that comes in, as if they were your best friend who you haven't seen for 20 years, and they finally come home. And so that's what we try to do every Saturday night with the street community in Brighton. But we also ran Alpha, and Alpha is an amazing opportunity to ask questions and to work out things for ourselves. There's patience, there's time, there's no question that you're not allowed to ask. There's no thought that you're not allowed to express. And you can allow people to work out their own way to the journey to come home. This is the Father who welcomes us home. And his capacity to welcome us home is always greater than our ability to get lost. We can hurt God so badly. This younger son had rejected his father, humiliated him, saying, I want my inheritance, saying, I want you dead. And then squandered half the property. All that his father had worked on for decades, lost in a matter of moments. He's hurt his father so badly. And the older son has hurt his father so badly too. He doesn't even call him father, refusing to go to the party, so disrespectful. Not even calling him his father, he says, look. A word of real rudeness, oi. And yet the Father still loves his sons. There is no distance too great. There is no sin so serious that God will not keep loving us. We can break his heart, but we can never destroy his love. He always waits for us. He always welcomes us home. About 10 years ago, there was a story in the British news about a 15-year-old girl called Megan Stamets, who ran away with her teacher to France. And there was this big thing in the news, and her mother got up on front of live TV cameras and looked into the camera and said, I have a message for my daughter. Sweetheart, I don't care what you've done or why. I just want you to come home. And that is how God feels about every single one of us. Whether we get lost in obvious ways or very subtle and invisible ways. He stands in front of each one of us and says, my son, my daughter, my love, my sweetheart, I don't care what you've done or why. I just want you to come home. Should we pray? Let's stand as we pray. I'm going to share in communion in a moment, but just before that, I'm just going to pray for God's Holy Spirit to come and to draw near each one of us. And so just whatever you're comfortable doing, sometimes what I do is I just put my hands out in front of me, and this is a kind of a physical gesture. Okay, Lord, I want to receive from you whatever you have. And so pray, come, Holy Spirit, Spirit of the living God, the one who is able to draw us to yourself. Lord, we pray you'd help each of us come back home to you. If we've got distracted, or we've grown hardened, if we've made mistakes and we don't know how to get out of them, and Lord, we want to come home to you today. Thank you for what you've done on the cross, bridging that great divide, so that each one of us can come home.